Here's a cool detail to spotlight about the Mrs. Hawking shows. In Mrs. Frost, a recurring motif in the dialogue is lines from the poem Jabberwocky, the beloved children's nonsense rhyme written by Lewis Carroll.
Beware the Jabberwock, my son. The jaws that bite, the claws that catch.
It first occurs as a small side detail when Clara tells Nathaniel something about their young son, Reggie.
You may be interested to hear that Madge says Reggie's learned the whole of Jabberwocky by heart. He means to recite it for you this evening, so you're in for a treat.
Clever lad.
Released in 1871 as part of his famous Through the Looking Glass novel, Carroll's poem has always been a favorite of adults and children alike, and is used here to demonstrate something of the affectionate domestic life of the Hawking family. As Mrs. Frost goes on, and Nathaniel is taken into captivity by the eponymous villain, we hear him reciting lines from the poem to himself and others. Because we know that Nathaniel associates them with his son and his family in general, it gives the appearance of these lines a powerful meaning diegetically, or within the world of the play, that when Nathaniel speaks them, he is thinking of and drawing strength from the idea of his loved ones. But we chose to use the poem Jabberwocky in specific because of what we could make it mean semiotically, or how we could use it to send messages to the audience about the meaning of our story, even if the characters themselves aren't aware of those meanings. There is a clear connection between the monster of the poem and Mrs. Frost as the head of a criminal organization, who has her claws in many different enterprises. The hero who stands in opposition to the Jabberwock can be mapped to Mrs. Hawking, who stalks after the beast with a vorpal blade of her own. The line, "As in uffish thought he stood, the Jabberwock with eyes of flame came whiffling through the tulgey wood and burbled as it came," suggests the confrontation that they have at the ball in the story's climax, where Mrs. Hawking waits and steels herself to face off with Mrs. Frost. Next, there's Nathaniel's last line before Mary appears to take on Roland.
I can keep this up for far longer than you. One more.
1, 2. 1, 2, and through the vorpal blade went snicker-snack. He leapt it.
It's as if the battle in the poem is playing out right in front of him. Finally, the poem ends with,
"And hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Come to mine arms, my beloved."
Not only does this show Nathaniel holding to the thought of his young son, it reflects Nathaniel's own strength and courage in the face of this adversity, for which his family will take him into their arms and hold him close. Using references to the literature of the period in the Mrs. Hawking stories has a lot of powerful effects. It helps us ground the audience in the sense of the character's world when we show what art was familiar to them and had an impact on their lives.
What if I win?
Use me as you would your spaniel.
But it also allows us to borrow the associations our audience has with these pieces of literature, and invoke their connections and emotions in the course of the story we're telling right now.
You may address me as Mrs. Johanna Brown.
If we use them judiciously, we can create a lot of meaning both within the world of the narrative and on the meta level of what we're trying to say with the story that we're telling.
Literature, then. My daughter's halfway through Wuthering Heights, and she has ever so many opinions on that bloody Heathcliff.
And you can see all of Mrs. Frost here on our YouTube channel, @Mrs. Hawking.
Oh, don't blame me. I thought Catherine was much better off with Edgar. But then I'm always soft on the nice chaps.